But since we do have to do it one more time, I do ask everybody, please remember how you load it up on the surface, since we will load that same way to return to the surface. Now, before we do get going on this tour, I do have a couple of quick safety reminders. First off, I do ask everybody to please watch your step. There are some tripping hazards throughout the tour, but as long as you stay in between these two rails, that is going to be the easiest way to avoid any of those tripping hazards. I also want to remind you that this is a mine. With that, I ask everybody, please keep your hard hats on. There are some low clearance areas, so especially the taller of you, I generally have at least one person try to knock their head somewhere. Have you keep that hard hat on, we can avoid any injury and we can all have a good time. And please feel free to take as many pictures and videos as y'all would like. I certainly am not camera shy, so as long as I'm not ruining your picture, feel free to take those pictures. All right. Now, around the turn of the century, when we first started mining down here, getting light down here was not the simple task that it is today. Your early miners would have been issued 2 candles per shift. The more experienced of those men would actually blow out those candles, operate in complete darkness, just to make sure that they could save some of that candle for their wives at the end of the night. To give you an idea what that looked like, this is lantern light. It is twice as bright as a candle, and unfortunately also burns twice the oxygen. Since we were forcing air down here for the men to breathe, we really didn't like using tools like this, as it drastically shortened the amount of time we could spend underground safely. But as I said, many of those men would even blow that out and operate in conditions much closer to this. So if it's not bad enough just to stand here and have a conversation in the dark, those men were swinging hammers and all that. Now, we would have been using these chisel head steels down here, and every time we hit, we would turn. That's how you end up with a round hole from a flat head. And eventually, after you went through all these different lengths, you would end up with a 3-foot deep hole to load with dynamite. Now, to make this a little easier, we would work as a team, as you see over here in the corner. That gentleman is called a striker, and in front of him, we have a shaker. I'm not really certain where that term comes from, but I'm guessing it's got something to do with the fact that he's shaking in his boots with that hammer swinging behind him. Especially doing this in the dark. Luckily, though, our striker has a really good reason to try not to miss. That's because every 20 minutes or so, they're going to switch spots. So if you accidentally hit your buddy, you can imagine who's going to accidentally hit you back in 20 minutes. Naturally, we did get a little tired of that. So when we finally found this carbide lamp here, we were very excited to put it into use. This produces an acetylene gas that burns much brighter than a candle while still using less oxygen. That's why when we finally started wearing hard hats instead of fedoras, we implemented that carbide lamp as one of the earliest headlamps. Unfortunately, we forgot to think about the fact that we would also be walking around with a 2-inch flame sticking out of our forehead. So if you stood up too quick, your eyebrows disappeared just as quick. If you notice, Bob here has no eyebrows. That's because Bob is what we call a tenderfoot, or a newbie down here in the mines. And well, as you can see, he learned the hard way. Now, the real easy way to tell that he is a tenderfoot is because he's still wearing his suit. That's because these men were paid $3 a day, which was considered to be very good wages for an uneducated man of that period. That also meant that we had a nice long line of men up on the surface just waiting for their opportunity to work down here. When it became your turn, if you took the time to go change, by the time you got back, they'd given your job to the next man in line. Now, as we do proceed through the tour, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. I will answer as many of them as I possibly can. All right, y'all want to go ahead and lead the way to our next stop? I'll lead the way. Okay. And we don't have room for a single file line here, but if y'all want to group in together. Alright, so as we managed to get our holes deep enough to load with dynamite, we would blast to produce what we call muck. That's what this pile back here is. That's why we call that gentleman a mucker. His only job down here is to fill our 1-ton ore cart 2 to 3 times every hour. So that's not hard enough to do by itself, and in the dark, most of these mines were still only about 5.5 feet tall at that point in time. Just barely tall enough for a donkey to tow our ore carts through here without its ears rubbing on the back. So if you were a taller gentleman like Mr. Jack Dempsey, who was 6'2", it was rather difficult to keep up. In fact, Mr. Dempsey got fired from every mine he tried to work in our district, primarily because he couldn't keep up. Partially because he had a bit of an attitude problem and liked to fight though. Which does kind of make sense when you find out that he did go on to be a heavyweight boxing champion of the world, even though he couldn't hold the job down while he was here in our district. Now, as we look over here, that IMCO 12B, that machine is also called a mucker. It is so much more efficient though. With that, we can fill our ore cart in a matter of minutes. Another advantage to getting that equipment is when we got that, is when we started mining to a taller height, as we needed a little bit more clearance in order to operate that equipment. Now here in a moment, I'm going to operate that and show you exactly how it works. As I do, I want everybody to keep in mind that all of our equipment down here is original to the mine. With that being said, most of it is pretty loud, so I do recommend covering your ears while it is in operation. Alright, now if I could ask you back up just a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and drop this chain down. Give everybody that much needed false sense of security. Alright, now if you do want to huddle up to that chain, that will be your best viewing experience. And if you're recording, this is one I recommend since I do have to write on it in order to demonstrate. Now if you're going to cover your ears, this would be time to do that as well. Alright, everybody ready? Here we go. As you can see, that is so much easier to operate and load this thing with than trying to do that by hand with a shovel. It's definitely not any safer though. I'm actually not convinced that these miners ever heard the word safe, considering some of the crazy stuff they did while they were underground down here in the mines. Alright, as we do around this corner, please watch your step as we're crossing between 2 different sets of tracks here.
Very cool.
I love it down here. It's so crazy to think about all the stuff that they did to be able to make that $3 a day. Oh, man. It's so baffling. Now with the introduction of compressed air here in the mines, we had a bunch of tools to choose from. One of the earliest we used was this column drill here, weighing about 250 pounds. Unfortunately, that meant that it did take 2 men to transport and operate. We'd set it up by pinching this column in between the back and the floor, and then mounting the drill on the column. From there, we would insert our first of 3 different drill bits that we need to achieve a depth of now 6 feet per hole. After each hole, we could move that drill up or down a little bit, but generally, after 3 or 4 holes, we'd have to break down this entire assembly and move it over a couple of inches and set all back up before we could continue drilling. So this was a rather time-consuming process when you figure that our goal was this blast pattern here. Now if you notice, there is nothing in that center hole. That's because our rock here is so dense that without that reliever hole, the dynamite could not break the rock. So by putting that reliever in place, when these first 4 detonate, it manages to crack into that reliever. From there, the blasts go up and down the sides, then across the top to create a new back, and the last 3 to go off are these 3 down here called lifters. And that's exactly what they do. They lift all this muck up and out of here so that we can actually load it and take it to the surface. Without those lifters, we're stuck with a 6-foot deep jigsaw puzzle trying to figure out how to get out of there in the dark. Definitely not nearly as fun as the ones we're doing at home. Now believe it or not, the most unreliable part of this entire setup is actually the dynamite itself. That's because of our temperature down here. We maintain right around 50 degrees year round. The problem with that is dynamite actually freezes between 52 and 55. So we'd rush all that dynamite down here. We'd then shove 6 sticks in every single one of these holes, run the fuse far enough to avoid the shockwave, and then detonate, count, and pray that everything actually went off. If it did not, our lucky tenderfoot back there got sent in here with this really fancy tool called a spoon, and was then told to dig the rest of that live dynamite out. Well, if you're not careful while you're doing this, it is not very difficult to make that spark. If that spark's in front of the dynamite, chances are you're gonna have a pretty lousy day. And unfortunately, the policy in place, if that did happen, was wait 15 minutes, send somebody else. So to avoid some of these unnecessary dangers, we started using DuPont stick warmer here. We'd fill that thing up with dynamite, leave it up on the surface next to the fire stove, wait for it to get up to about 80 degrees. That gave us almost 2 hours to load our blasting pattern, making for a much more reliable detonation. But now we're also talking about leaving a box of dynamite next to the fire. So I'm not sure it was any safer, but it was a whole heck of a lot more reliable. These guys were a little bit crazy. As we do round the corner here, we move forward in time just a little bit. And with that, we stopped using all of this dynamite and found an explosive that fit our needs a whole lot better. And that is this AMFO here. Now, AMFO is a mixture of diesel and fertilizer, and it's far more stable for transportation, doesn't have issues with freezing. Thanks to this siphon gun right here, it's actually a lot easier to load into our blasting pattern, but most importantly, when we detonate, it has a very large explosion. Definitely our favorite part about it here in our district, but for all those reasons combined, this is actually the explosive we still use to this very day up on the surface at the Newmont mine where y'all can see the dump trucks operating up there. Now to replace that column drill, we started using drills like this. This is called the jackleg drill. That thing only weighs about 90 pounds, so I can actually transport and operate all by myself now. Another advantage is we no longer have to change bits, since while I'm drilling, that extends. That means I can start with that longest bit and no longer waste all that time changing it out in the middle of every hole. With this, I can drill that entire blast pattern in under 2 hours by myself. That allows us to get many blasts per shift instead of the 3 or 4 per day that we were getting when we were doing it all by hand. Now over here, this timing technology is what we use instead of fuses when we switch over to this AMFO. Now that yellow cable with the black stripe around it, that is called det cord. That stuff burns at 23,000 feet per second. So basically when we trigger that, it is almost simultaneously triggering all these shorter yellow tubes called shock tubes. Well, those are all pressure sensitive, and from there, those numbers represent exactly how long after it is triggered before it will detonate. That allows us to get our blasts exactly the distance apart as we need them to, generally about 1 second in between each blast. But it makes for a much more reliable blast, as when we're actually controlling the timing of it, we can control the pressure from each explosion to help us get a much better result in that blast. Now, as we walk to the next station, I'm going to have everybody listen to this recording. This recording will give you a really good idea of what it sounded like to be down here underground while we were actually blasting. And the crazy part is, there's only 5 explosions in this recording, but it sounds like a whole lot more thanks to the echo. And we'll keep walking this way. We'll be able to hear plenty. Pretty crazy how much that thing echoes, isn't it?
God, I can only imagine.
Especially if you were down here and didn't get told that it was going to go off.
Yeah, exactly. Kaboom.
Yup, and when they're blasting, you actually can feel it in your ribs. It is insane how much vibration gets sent out through most of that. So does anybody have any guesses what all this white stuff we're seeing is?
We were wondering about that.
It's not calcium. Any other guesses?
Salt?
Salt is exactly what it is. Now it is not table salt, it's actually Epsom salt, which is why I asked that we do not taste it. since Epsom salt is considered to be a bit of a laxative, and I do not have the amenities to help that emergency. So as that water from the surface makes its way all the way down here through the rock, it picks up any minerals that it can dissolve and bring with it. The most prevalent example that you'll see of that in this tour is the Epsom salt we're seeing now. We're going to touch base on that topic a little farther in the tour when I have some much better examples to point out some of those other minerals to you. Now, as we round this corner, if you stick your hand out, you'll notice you can feel a little bit of a breeze coming from this drift. That breeze is 100% natural, even though we're 1,000 foot underground. We managed to achieve that by connecting all the mines within our 25 square mile district so that we no longer had to force air down here for the miners to breathe. In fact, what we're breathing now is significantly cleaner than what was being forced down here for the miners to breathe in the first place. Now, we took all these connected mines and straightened them out into one long line. We'd actually be able to walk from here all the way to London and halfway back because of how many thousands of miles are buried underground in this district. If we did map it all out, it would look something like a massive ant colony. And on that map, we're only about a third of the way down, since the deepest underground mine in our district is in excess of 3,000 feet down. That's a long ways down. All right, if y'all want to go ahead and lead the way, we're going to be stopping where you see those wooden pillars on the right-hand side.
You said London.
Over in Europe.
London, England?
London, England, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
So how many miles is that?
I don't know exactly how many miles that is, but it's estimated that we've got around 15 to 20,000 miles of tunnels underground here. So lots and lots of mileage.
When we lost them.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Third of them are probably destroyed by now from the Newmont mine, re-mining over everything that we mine. Since they're a surface mine, they're just digging everything up. They don't care where the tunnels were. Their equipment will roll right over a tunnel this small. So now as we were creating this drift here, we were actually following gold when we did that. That is why it is called a drift instead of a crosscut. Now when we follow gold, we follow it wherever it takes us. As you see behind me, that does include up. And if y'all want to round in so you can see up better, you're absolutely welcome to. Now, not only would we follow that gold up, we actually preferred to mine up. At that point, we got to make friends with gravity and let gravity do the hard work for us. Now, if we reference this image over here, you'll see that we had created a bench. The purpose of that is so that when we blast, that ore would fall from the top down onto the bench instead of coming all the way to the bottom and blocking or damaging our rails down here. From there, we could use the machine behind me called a slusher to pull that ore across the bench into the ore chute there, and in turn, load up the ore carts down to the bottom that way. Now, I did say that we were following gold to create this raise behind me. It's kind of a loose statement. Visually, what we were actually following was that vein right there. That is fluorite. Now, fluorite itself doesn't really have a lot of value to it, but we discovered that anytime we followed that fluorite, we almost always found enough gold to make a profit, meaning about a half ounce per ton. So if we had a dime made out of gold, threw that into that 1 ton ore cart, that is all the gold we needed to find to be able to make a profit. What made that so difficult is the gold here in our district got put here through volcanic eruption millions of years ago. When that eruption happened, it cracked the rock all the way up to the surface, filled those cracks in with magma, and that's how we ended up with mineral veins like that fluorite behind me. Unfortunately, in that same process, all those mineral veins all the minerals got superheated and mixed up at a microscopic level, so we really can't visually identify most of it anymore. In fact, less than 1% of the gold in our district is what's known as free gold. And that's the stuff that you're looking for when you go panning that has that familiar yellowish gold color that we've all been taught to recognize. Unfortunately for us, the other 99% looks a lot like the rock right there around that fluorite, where you really can't tell that it's there. That's why every time we blast, we take some of that ore, throw it into an ore bag like this, and let the assayers process it. At that point, they would be able to come back to us with a number of exactly how much gold to expect per ton of ore. If that number was lower than a half ounce of gold per ton, we'd simply abandon that vein, go work somewhere else where we could actually make some money. Now, before we do move on, I'm gonna go ahead and demonstrate the slusher for you. As I do, if y'all wanna round in a little bit closer, you're more than welcome to. And if you're covering your ears, this is a reminder that our equipment's not very quiet, so if you wanna cover your ears, this would be the time. All right, everybody ready? Here we go. As you can see, that is extremely simple technology. But that's why we liked it so much. With it being that simple, it was very easy to relocate to other spots and levels within the mine. And we didn't have to worry about wasting time or money on maintenance and actually got to spend our time making money instead. Does anybody have any questions that haven't been answered up to this point? Doing all right, covering our bases? Yeah. All right, I just wanted to check in, make sure nobody was being too shy to ask. All right, we'll go ahead and keep walking. This is going to be our longest walk in between two individual stops. As you do walk this way, you'll start seeing that we have a lot more color coming through amidst all that salt. Which is why our next stop is where we get to talk about all those minerals. Yeah, if you want to step down there for better pictures, as long as you don't cross that yellow chain, you're welcome to step up beside the aircraft. So as I said, this is where we're going to talk a little bit more about some of these minerals. Anybody have any guesses what all this bluish green stuff we're seeing is?
Copper.
That's exactly what it is. That is oxidized copper. So a lot of our minerals down here have been oxidized by the fact that they've interacted with so much salt before they hit the oxygen down here in our mine. Another very good example of all of this that everybody sees on their everyday life is actually these dark, almost black stalactites above you. Anybody have any guesses what those might be?
Is the water seeping through?
Yeah, it is coming from that water seeping through, but that is iron. Therefore, rust is what's creating those stalactites. And over here, all this yellow, that is all actually sulfur. Now, in most parts of the world, these stalactites actually take hundreds to even thousands of years to develop. Lucky for us, because of all of our salts, ours grow rather quickly here. If we stopped giving tours, it wouldn't be too much longer before we ended up with a bunch more stalagmites, as you see on and around my air tram here. And eventually, those stalagmites and stalactites would grow enough to combine in what we call a column. If you look down this drift, you'll notice we do have a couple of columns. Best viewing is this side of the air tram. As long as you don't cross that yellow chain, you're welcome to step back there for better pictures or viewing. As you do look down there, you'll also see that we have an ore chute. That is what the slusher was pulling ore into 300 feet above us in order to load up our ore carts down here. Now, who saw that we passed an air tram while we were walking down here? Do you see how much smaller it was than this one? That's because it was the first one of its kind created in our district. Unfortunately, when we got to testing, we figured out that it didn't hold enough air to travel a distance worth using it. In fact, the distance that it could travel while under load was a big fat zero, since it also didn't have enough weight to grip the rails. So naturally, we kept working on it as we really did not like pushing our own mine carts after the donkeys retired. And we finally figured out that simply by making it larger, we resolved both issues of capacity and weight, making a very effective piece of equipment that got used for the rest of underground gold mining here in our district. Apparently, sometimes size really does matter.
How come you retired the donkeys?
We didn't choose, we kind of chose to do that. So, back when we were using the donkeys, we generally bring them down as babies. Otherwise, they were born, raised, and died down here in the mines. Unfortunately, that meant a lot of them never even saw the light of day a single time in their lives. They never saw anything brighter than a candle, actually. That's why when Teddy Roosevelt showed up to figure out what the gold hype was about here in the district, he figured out that donkeys were living like that and told us that we had to take them out for sunlight for a few hours every single day. The problem with that, it meant trying to take them up in the shaft that we came out of, which we thought was even meaner, or taking them for a really long walk to find a horizontal exit. So ultimately we decided that was pretty much a waste of our time, and we just set all those donkeys free. Well, unfortunately, in that process, since these donkeys had never seen anything brighter than that candle, most of those donkeys were immediately blinded by the sunlight. So they could no longer fend for themselves. In fact, many of them actually tried to make their ways back into the mines because those were the sounds that they were familiar with, and they were terrified being outside of the mines, especially being blind where they couldn't see all the predators and everything else. So that's why the community there in Cripple Creek at the time, they started caring for those donkeys to help them protect themselves and feed them and everything else. So that's why if you're actually down in the city of Cripple Creek now, if you see donkeys wandering around, it's because they're all descendants of the donkeys that used to work our mines. So they still wander around down there. And they have more rights than we do, actually. They've kind of figured that out, too. They know that if they get in front of your car, that you're going to stop. And then one of them's going to stick their head in your car to try to get some snacks, because most of the time, that works. They've figured it out. They know they're spoiled. All right, y'all want to go ahead and continue to the next room? We're only going about 20 feet this time, so if you didn't get a chance to look down that drift, feel free to make sure to take your time to do that, take some pictures, whatever. I don't think we'll lose you in this 15-foot gap.
Yeah.
So as we were developing that raise where it demonstrated the slusher, after that raise hits a height of about 100 feet, we generally start calling them stopes. That's why these drills are called stoping drills. Now this one is actually the first kind we use in our district. If you ask me though, it does not meet the qualifications to be called a drill. This is just a jackhammer. You turn it into a drill by doing this the entire time you're operating it. That's where it got its first nickname. We used to call this thing a wiggly tail drill. Now the problem with the wiggly tail, other than the fact that I have to dance with it to use it, is actually what we're drilling into. We didn't realize when we started mining up here that this rock is loaded in silica. When you breathe in that silica dust, you end up with silicosis, which essentially means that every time you cough, you have thousands of pieces of glass inside of your lungs, just shredding your lungs from the inside out. It is a very painful way to go. And unfortunately, while that drill was still in use, a miner's life expectancy would actually drop down to 3 to 10 years from the first time they used it, which is exactly why we don't call it a wiggly tail anymore. We instead now prefer to call it a widowmaker. So to avoid the issues we had with the widowmaker killing off all our miners, we started using stoping drills more like this one. With this, we would carry around that jack tank full of water, pump water through the drill, up through a hole in the bit, and then instead of breathing in that nasty dust, we're just going home covered in a wet, sticky mud. Pretty fair trade, if you ask me. Now, in a moment, I'm also going to demonstrate this drill for you. As I do, I highly recommend covering your ears on this one, as this is the loudest tool that I'm going to demonstrate today. Can you imagine running one of those for 8 hours a day down here with all that echo, walking out of here shaking? And make matters worse, at that point in time, we didn't even have hearing protection yet. In fact, the earliest form of hearing protection was when they came out with filtered cigarettes. They ripped the filters off of those and shoved them in their ears, just trying to protect their hearing. Probably about the only good thing cigarettes did for anybody.
So there was dynamite up in there then? No.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, it was just, so these holes are about 1 1/8 inches. So it was about the exact same size as that dynamite, so we could shove them up in there and there was enough friction that it would hold it up in there. And then when we're using the ANFO, since that's more of a powder, then we just have a clay blasting cap that we put in the end to fill that in, so. Alright, now in this next room, since we just talked about minerals, I actually really like to point out some of my favorite stalactites of the tour. Right up there to your right, you'll see we have a beautiful iron stalactite. That thing is so clean, it almost looks like amber. But my personal favorite stalactite of the entire tour is actually the copper one right over here. I don't understand how it ends up so clear, because basically the copper in that is just acting as food coloring for the salt. So it's basically a salt formation, so how it gets that clear look to it, or translucent look, I don't understand. It's so pretty though. But if y'all want to gather in a little bit tighter and up against this back wall here, we're actually looking this way and up. That is the queen best stove. If you want to step up a little farther behind me, you can see up better from back farther. Now, this stove goes up 800 feet all the way to our 200 level. That gentleman up there is called a stove rat. His only job in the mine is to develop these stoves, which means that he is always following gold and making money. That's why they pay him $4 a day instead of $3 a day. Unfortunately, with that $1 a day raise, he's also no longer allowed to leave his position. Once he gets up there for his shift, he stays up there his entire shift. That means taking breaks, eating lunch, using the restroom, everything got done up there. The only time he was allowed to leave was when they were actively blasting what he had just drilled. And even then, he was still returning to drilling before the dust had even settled from that blast. Now, to make it possible that he never had to leave his position, we would employ the sons of the widows down here at 50 cents a day, generally starting these little boys out between the ages of 8 and 12 years old. With this, they'd be able to hoist tools and drill bits up to those stove rats, and in turn, those stove rats would lower down any dull or damaged tools, so this little boy could take them over to the blacksmith to have them repaired while he continued working. Pretty crazy to think about a full-time job at 8 years old, isn't it? It's a couple days before child labor laws. All right, now as we pass through here, please do watch your step as it gets a little uneven and narrow. And if y'all want to go ahead and find yourself a seat on the air tram, we're about to take a short ride. Now, the only advice I can say to picking out your seats is the front gets the darkest, the back gets the loudest. So pick from there whichever you would like to deal with. That's it, right? Yep, appreciate it. Alright, as we navigate through the mine, I do ask everybody to please keep your fingers, toes, arms, and legs inside of the train while it's in motion. There's a couple of spots that get a bit dark and deceivingly narrow, and quite frankly, that's where the Tommyknockers like to hang out the most. If you don't know what a Tommyknocker is, they're essentially gremlins that got lost in our mine centuries ago. And if we're gonna be honest, their sense of humor is just as dark as the mines that they're lost in. They're not very friendly creatures. Alright. I got enough pressure to reach our next destination, so we'll get going. Now this one's not terribly loud, but especially as you get towards the back, closer to me, some people do still like to cover their ears. I will leave that all up to you though. Alright, here we go. exit the airstream, please watch your step. So this room here is our tool room. This is where the blacksmith would have hung out so that the little boy could bring tools here instead of taking them up to the surface every single time. Now personally, my favorite tool to talk about while we're in here is actually this superintendent's bike. That is what the bosses would ride in between all the different mines they were in charge of in order to keep tabs on the miners, make sure they were keeping up with their quotas. Well, when a superintendent tasked the blacksmith with designing this bike, they did a lot of thinking before implementing a design and ultimately decided that its most important feature was actually its weight. By making it really heavy, they did two very important things. They made it really slow and really loud. So you always had plenty of heads up before the super actually showed up. Now we're gonna go ahead and continue on down that drift, folks. I will meet you in the room there at the end. That right side gate pushes open first. Now we're not gonna spend a lot of time in there, so if y'all do wanna take pictures of those displays, I do encourage that, as there's some very cool information in there. And while y'all get started in there, I'm gonna air this thing back up and send it back.
So question, I
Yes.
see a telephone over there. Is that something they had down here?
Not back then, no.
Okay.
No, that's MSHA telling us we have to have it for communication in case of emergencies down here.
Yeah.
That's all, that started well after we even started doing tours here.
Yeah.
That's fairly new.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit out of place there. But
Yeah, they've got I think 4 of them throughout the tour.
Mhm.
So if something does happen, I can get a hold of my hoistman, somebody up top in case something needs to happen about it. Or if something happens up there and they wanna call me and tell me, like, they made me hold the tour for about a half hour one time because we had golf ball size sail up on the surface. It's a lot more comfortable to hang out down here and have a conversation, so.
Yeah.
Small things like that, but it is nice to be able to communicate with the surface, which they could not do back in the day, so.
You don't have service down here.
No service, no GPS, no nothing down here. Just those phones.
It's very smooth. It's pink.
What? Oh yeah, that's sulfuric acid, so you wanna wipe that on my sweater instead of your suit. I don't care. That's why I wear it to work every day. It's not super dangerous, but if it stays on your clothes too long, it could end up putting a hole there. It's mostly from the heat in the dryer. It's not dangerous by any means. It's not something you want to put on your suit. Yeah, I get plenty of it on here. It's really, yeah, as I said, it's only like when you go through the dry cleaning process, things like that, it could interact with it. Welcome to open that up. That's exactly what I'm gonna do. While y'all look over these displays, I'm gonna look through all this ore. Now this ore all came from other levels within the mine. Unfortunately, due to the overhead cost of extracting the gold, it's not really worth it to us to do so. So instead, we're gonna send all of you home with a piece of Cripple Creek gold ore as a souvenir. Now, as I look through here and try to find pieces for everybody, if you wanna take time to look over these displays and possibly ask questions, this would be a fantastic time for that, as I'm going to be distracted looking at rocks. Now, there's a few different things I'm looking for. One of them primarily is to make sure it looks pretty on a shelf, because we gotta remember, this is still a souvenir. But I am trying to make sure that we have some of the symbols or signs that we would look for while we were actually looking for gold. So one of them would be to identify iron pyrite versus actual gold. Iron pyrite is very pretty, so I will still pick those up. But it was generally known as fool's gold, and the easiest way to tell it apart from everything else is its small square shapes that it makes, or cubes. Iron pyrite is very good at creating those cubes, whereas gold doesn't really like to. But what makes it so difficult to tell the difference between the gold and the iron pyrite is actually the fact that it all got put here through that volcanic eruption because it mixed everything together. Well, we have a lot of silver up here as well. So that silver and gold mixed into what we call collaborite, which is 60% gold, 40% silver. Now it looks a lot like iron pyrite. So for many years, those miners that were familiar with gold mining from the California gold rush and such would show up here and recognize that iron pyrite and throw it over their shoulder. Well, they would do the same thing with the collaborite, no idea that real gold was turning them into fools here in our district. Now, when they finally figured out that collaborite and iron pyrite look a lot alike, they also figured out that they could simply smash it with a hammer, and that gold would condense together because of how much more malleable it is, while the iron pyrite would shatter and turn into dust. So that was one of the easier ways to identify it. Other things we would follow, as I pointed out, was that fluorite. So when we found that purple rock, we would certainly follow that. Cinnabar is another one that we would follow. That's what this one got selected for, is because that's a very good example of that cinnabar. Gets that bright red color from mercury. Well, mercury actually used to get used for extracting the gold out of the ore. And so when it got put there through that volcanic eruption, everything was liquidated and that gold still stuck to the mercury and the cinnabar just as well. So most of the time we have pretty good luck finding gold around cinnabar as well. Now, a lot of these pieces are a few of these pieces are gonna have that really orange color in it. I selected these pieces because that orange color is a really good sign of gold itself. In fact, if you look up, that right there is a gold vein. That's why it's leaking all those colors. That gold vein continues all the way through here and all the way back to the tool room, since it was actually manufactured for the sole purpose of extending this gold tour instead of extracting gold. So now that gold vein just sits there and taunts all the miners that walked through here for decades, never knowing how close they were to a nice rich gold ore vein. As that we actually did have some of it assayed and figured out that it weighs about 4 ounces per ton. So we would have loved to mine it back when we were actually a production mine instead of just doing tours. Let's see, we had 12, there's 6. We'll grab a couple more so that we still have some choice for everybody. And then we will be continuing on through here shortly. Did anybody have any questions that haven't been answered yet? Or are we still doing okay?
So today, they would be just taking the whole area and taking, how high did the day compared to following the vein?
Wait, say that one more time?
So you used to follow the veins, you said?
Yes, when we're developing
They
drifts.
still kind of follow, obviously they have to follow.
Up on the surface, they do still a little bit, but not nearly as much.
Okay.
Because the reason we were so specific about following the veins is we needed that 1/2 ounce per ton, because we only extract 1 ton at a time, which is why we're called a 1-ton mine, because these ore carts hold 1 ton at a time. The surface mine, actually, those small dump trucks hold 250 tons. So each one of their trips is equivalent to 250 trips from down here. Mm-hmm. So they don't care how rich their ore is. They'll extract whatever they can out of it and take it anyways. Because even at 1/2 ounce per ton, 250 times, that's still 125 ounces. So it adds up a lot quicker when you can process the less valuable ore, which is how they actually manage to make a profit. Mm-hmm. That surface mine actually extracts over $1 million of gold every single day of the week.
Is that right?
It is. Actually, my favorite number to talk about is they teach people about the California gold rush and the Alaskan gold rush. If you combine the amount of gold that came out of both of those gold rushes together, this mine, or that surface mine up there, still produces more than that every single year and has since the early 90s. Pretty crazy. Now, I did get lucky. I found a piece of that fluorite that I was talking about. It's not very big, but if you look, you can see the tip of that is purple. That shows you just how purple that fluorite really is. Like, it stands out like a sore thumb. That's why this stuff disappears so quick, and we don't have a lot of it, so it doesn't go as far. Anybody want that one with the purple? Or if I'll just set it in here and let everybody choose. I don't know which one to get rid of. We'll just stack it up there. All right, now if y'all want to go ahead and select a piece of ore from me. And after you select your ore, if you want to go ahead and pass through that right side gate, it pulls open. As soon as everybody catches up, I'll let you know so that we can drop that chain and keep moving. entertaining for you, we'll get you forward.
We get to do that, so what is the value of like half an ounce of gold for the bank side?
Back then, it was about $20 an ounce, so it would have been about $10 is what we needed to be able to make a profit. Nowadays, though, gold is valued a little over $2,000 an ounce.
Okay.
So it's a lot more valuable now than it was then, but at the same time, is it really though? Because a dollar doesn't mean nearly as much as it used to back then either. So what we're seeing in here is what we call a winze. A winze is created when we follow the gold down instead of up. We're only ever gonna do this on the lowest level, since the hardest part of developing winze is getting that ore up and out. So if we had a lower level, we'd simply go down there and mine up. Gravity would do our hard work for us. Unfortunately, it was not always an option to pawn our work off on gravity, so we did find some alternatives. The original solution was that windlass right back there. One man at either end cranking away, just like you see in those old cartoons. Naturally though, when we got compressed air, we found a much better solution, and that's when we came up with this sinking bucket contraption. I'm gonna stand off to the side so everybody can see it. So with this, we lower that bucket all the way down to the bottom, load it up by hand with a half ton of ore. So it only took about 2 trips to fill up our mine carts. Unfortunately, that bucket was not only for ore, but that is actually how the miners got in and out of the mine. So when I was talking about trying to figure out how to send donkeys up through that shaft, that's how we were trying to figure out how to send them up. We decided that was a lot meaner than leaving them down here. But back then, we would have thrown all of our tools in the center of that bucket. One man stood on the outside rim on both sides, so 2 men per trip, and then held on to that cable, and that way we would go. For that reason, it was just as dangerous to get into the mine as it was to do your job within the mine. If it wasn't only because you're hanging on from this cable a few hundred feet down, and there's a whole lot of movement when you're hanging that far down, or the fact that you've got 2 men trying to balance on opposite sides of this bucket on that smooth, wet metal rim with your smooth leather-soled shoes that you had at that point in time. And we were doing all this before we even started wearing hard hats. So unfortunately, there was a fair amount of accidents that resulted simply from men trying to get to work. Now with this, in order to empty it, because as you can imagine, a half ton is not very easy to just dump over on the side. On the bottom of that, there's about a 12-inch chain that has a massive washer over to the end of it. When we get this bucket hoisted up to the point where it's a few inches above the top of this apron right here, we would be able to pull a cable to have this apron come down to me. If you can't see from the side, there's a little bit of a divot in the top of it. That is what would hold on to that chain while we lower this back down on the other side of this apron so that it could empty out all that ore. Very simple, but very effective. I wish I could still demonstrate this, but one of the sad parts about using original equipment is when it breaks, it takes a lot longer to fix since nobody makes these parts anymore. And unfortunately, about 3 weeks ago, our hoist over there went out. So we're waiting on parts from somebody that knows how to manufacture them since they don't make them anymore. All right, we're gonna go ahead and continue forward. Now as we do, please watch your step as we're crossing back into a set of rails right here. At this point, I'd like to offer to take pictures for anybody if you're interested in taking a picture with a 1,000-foot underground sign.
Get cozy, huh?
Yeah.
All right, you're all secure. I'll see you next week. I'll meet you up on the surface. All right, I'll see y'all in a few minutes.
Okay.
check these tables.
Alright, here we go. Now, some people do say it feels a little faster.
Well, this is a
going
lot
up.
better than trying to balance on
And that slight balancing sensation is because we're at the bottom of that.
Go up.
So it's just trying to equalize our weight down here.
Quicker than coming down.
Actually, fairly fast, probably for.
My nose really
Alright, folks, I just want to give everybody a heads up that when we cross the surface, it can be a bit bright since we have been underground for about an hour. Some people do describe it as actually a movie theater broad daylight. We are about to be coming up on the 200-foot shaft, which would mean that we only have about 15-20 seconds before we cross the surface. So I figured that was a good time to give you that heads up.
I think we're about to experience light.
I thought that, something about some people experience something.
Oh yeah. Probably Disney. I don't. Yeah. We're coming out of a theater, maybe. I think.
Prepare for that red light.
You should almost have a picture of this squished in you.
Alright, watch your step as you exit, please. And if you'll throw your hard hat over the fence into those totes for me, as soon as I unload the rest of the tour, we'll let you head this out.
He could. You want a picture of this yet?
Alright. Watch your step as you exit, please. If y'all will throw your hard hats over the fence.